Have you ever had an issue where you're editing the foreground and then the sky also gets edited for some reason? Well, in this video, we're gonna be solving that problem. So stick around and let's jump right to it. What's up, y'all? It's Project Photography back with another video, and today we have a little bit of a different video. You guys said you wanted more landscape photography tutorials, and I'm here coming with one today. Today we're gonna be looking at masks and how to use masks, and I pretty much answer the basic questions I had in the beginning part of this video about what do you do if you're trying to edit an image and you don't want to mess up the foreground or the background, but you want to edit one or the other. So that's exactly what we're talking about. Masks help do that by essentially isolating a certain part of the image and editing only that part within the mask. And a few benefits of masks is that, of course, if you have a very high contrast scene with a very bright sky and a very dark foreground, then you can edit them individually to make sure that they're evenly edited and one edit doesn't affect the other when it comes to the sky or the foreground. You can also edit certain parts of the image. For example, if there's a bottom part of the image that you just want to edit, you can edit just that. So I think masks are really good because it really helps you isolate certain parts of the landscape to edit and come out with overall a better image. So with that being said, first of all, I'm going to be running through the different types of masks that are available in Lightroom. And then after that, I'm gonna be showing you how to use them and what you should be looking out for and all that sort of stuff. So with that being said, let's jump right in and get right to Lightroom. So first of all, there's a few different types of masks, and you're gonna access it right here where it looks like this little circle thing. And first of all, I'm using Lightroom Classic, but this is definitely available in regular Lightroom as well. So you're gonna be looking at this little bubble here, and you can see it says add new mask. Now we have select subject, select sky, brush, linear gradient, radial gradient, and then other sorts of masks as well. The main ones we're going to be looking at is mainly the select sky, linear, and radial. You can use all these other ones to your benefit, but for me, these are probably the most potent ones that I use most often. So essentially what select sky does is it literally is as what it is. It says select sky, and when you click on it, it essentially creates an outline of the mask of the sky. It does a really good job most of the time. And what I like to do when I actually want to separate the foreground as well as the sky, I like to use this duplicate invert mask. So what that essentially does is it takes the mask that you originally had, like for example this sky mask, and then it inverts it and creates another mask. So now we have a mask for the top and bottom, and you can see both are covered really well. Now this is probably the most common mask that I use because we have high contrast scenes like this. You're able to edit the foreground and the sky individually. Another type of mask I like to use is the linear gradient. So you can pretty much do the same thing. By pulling it down more, you're essentially allowing more of the feather to come in. So it'll be a smoother transition from these 2 points. And then you can also do the same with this one. You have to just right click on it and duplicate invert mask if you want to do that. Adjusting this portion right here will make the feather either larger or smaller. So either smoother or less smooth transition. For me, I only use this if I really feel like the select sky isn't working too well, or there's a certain part of the foreground where I want to edit. And the last one I use is this radial gradient. So what essentially you can do is you can pull it and so forth, and you can see it'll edit within this sphere. And the farther out that you pull this, the more centered or less centered the edits will be. So those are essentially the 3 types of masks that I use. You could also use things like brushes. This is probably the other common one I use, and to do this, if you have a trackpad, for example, and you want to increase the size or decrease it, you just use 2 fingers and then increase it or decrease it as such. And then obviously if you brush over it, it'll edit the parts that you brush over and so forth. So those are essentially the 4 different types of masks that I use most commonly. The 3 most common ones I use are mainly the select sky, as well as the linear gradient and radial gradient, and brush sometimes if it's a very particular case. So one caveat I do want to mention before we actually go into start using the mask is that when you are editing before you use the mask, you want to make sure that you actually have the global adjustments made so that it kind of balances out the initial photo as much as possible. So for example, I'm just gonna go ahead and do the initial adjustments for this photo, and we're gonna be using the global adjustments, and then after that, we're gonna go into the mask and I'll show you how I use those. So first of all, we're gonna raise the exposure quite a bit. So this is a really good starting point. Now this isn't the final edit, but what we're trying to do here is make sure that the exposure is nice and evenly balanced while not making it look over like HDR kind of look, and making sure that there's no sort of weird artifacts that come into play when you're dealing with such a high contrast environment. But what we're essentially trying to do is make it so that when we are going to the mask and so forth, it's much easier to use them and edit, because it would be really difficult to just go straight into using the mask without having some sort of global adjustments. So that's what we're trying to do, make a really relatively evenly balanced exposure. So now we can go ahead and go into our global adjustments. And then I usually start with the select sky, and then I'd go ahead and duplicate and invert, so that when you're making edits to the actual mask itself, as you can see, it's only affecting the white portion of the mask. So we're working with this mask right here, and when I make the edits, it's only changing the sky. So that's exactly what these masks are trying to do. So what I would probably go here is I want to mess with the sky a lot more. So I want to kind of make it a little bit more balanced in terms of its exposure. Actually, I kind of like that there, so we're going to increase the clarity a bit. Maybe bring in some dehazing, because I kind of like the more hazy feel look of the image. And then we're going to go ahead and bring down the exposure just slightly. One thing I would caution you on is when you are actually making these edits, make sure that, you know, when you look at this skyline over here, that it doesn't look too overly, you know, obvious that you made edits individually the sky or the foreground, because that can definitely be a problem when you're editing these. So I think generally this looks fine, and then probably bring up the contrast slightly. So I'm pretty happy with that. I mean, it's a nice and even exposure. It's not too crazy. And that's the thing with these masks is that, and now we're editing the foreground, by the way, but that's the thing with these masks is that you make sure that it's not super obvious that you're using mask, and it's really nice and subtle. You don't want to make it so that it just looks overly processed and not that clean, because I do see a lot of edits sometimes that definitely make it feel that way. So I'm generally happy with that. Of course, this is like a very rough edit. If I was going to be going ahead and going into Lightroom and editing things very specifically, then, you know, I'd take my time with this. But just for the sake of this video, that is essentially what the power of masks do. And let's just say we wanted to use a radial gradient to enhance the look of the sun more. You can definitely do that by doing something like that, and then probably minimizing this so that it matches the center of the sun. So now if you want to go ahead and check and see what the effect of the mask was, you can go ahead and right click the actual mask itself and click hide, and then you can go ahead and unhide it, and you can see what the effect of it was. I think probably more obvious one would be something like this. So go ahead, hide it, and then if you click this, you can see what happens there. So that's pretty much it when using mask. I think it's a really good example. Here are the two examples of me using a mask, and this photo right here was not using any mask at all, and you can tell there's a massive difference when it comes to how the actual photos come out. And for me, it's really important. I use it essentially with all my landscapes, even if they're not super high contrast, because I just think it makes it look a lot better, and you know, you can really isolate the certain parts of the landscape. One thing I also really want to caution you is make sure that it looks natural. I've kind of harped on this point before, but make sure it looks natural and clean, and you don't have to worry about it looking over processed and so forth. To me, the best landscapes are definitely the ones that are the most natural, and you know, it doesn't look like there's a ton of processing done to them. So yeah, guys, that is pretty much it for this video on how to use mask, and make sure that when you're editing, you don't have to worry about, oh, like, is the foreground being edited while I'm editing the sky and so forth, because it's just honestly just a massive mess to deal with. So anyways, guys, let me know what you thought about this tutorial. I enjoy making these, and I want to help you guys improve your landscape photography. Let me know what other tutorials you would like to see down in the comment section down below. And please feel free to rate, comment, subscribe. Thank you so much for experiencing the world with me today, and I will catch you guys in the next one.